I didn't notice it, but my buddy Tom Withrow is here. And he and I have been friends for probably 40 years. While I was growing a firm, he was growing a firm. And we got to know one another because he was doing a business firm and I was doing a crazy firm. But probably 5 or 6 times during those years, I said to Tom, let's merge the two firms. And he always had a reason he didn't, and then
everybody makes a mistake.
I know. We got old together and we had a lot of fun, and Tom went to a couple of companies, and one day about 3 or 4 years ago he called me and said, let's get old together. And he's been with our firm ever since, and he's a hell of a good lawyer and had a hell of a good firm, and we should have joined one another. And then we would have been...
Here.
We'd have been bigger than Ice Miller.
Oh my God, no.
So let me just say something real quickly. I know Dina wanted to be here, but had a conflict, so I get to try to do what I will not do what she would have said justice. But let me just introduce what we're doing here. Mr. Wagner does this every year, and it's really important and really great, so thank you all for coming. I know the EC has been charged with updating our strategic plan, and one of the core pillars of what we're looking at is the culture of the firm. And we owe everything we have culture-wise to Mr. Wagner and the foundation he's laid. So that's something that is very important to the committee and the equity partners, to maintain the culture and carry on the legacy that Mr. Wagner has laid before us. And with that, I think we all know, but if you didn't, this will be Mr. Wagner's 50th year of practice, which is pretty remarkable. And we are all extremely fortunate for everything that Mr. Wagner and Tom and those that have come before us and the foundation they've laid. So, Mr. Wagner, thank you, and please continue to share your wisdom with us, and we look forward to what you're about to say today.
It occurred to me last evening, it's terribly difficult to put together 50 years of your life in an hour. If you go over to the McKinney Law School and you go up on the 2nd and 3rd floor, there are fascinating pictures of lawyers back in the 20s, the 30s, a little bit in the 40s. And they're very proper lawyers, because back then we had a depression and only people with money could go to law school. And I look at those pictures a lot and note how times have changed. I'm going to be talking about Ed Lewis, a little bit about myself, because it's called Lewis and Wagner. Ed Lewis, well, I want to tell you, the world really changed in 1945 when 13 million kids came back from the services. Rich men, poor men. You know what they had? They had a GI Bill of Rights. First time in the history of the United States, and people from little towns all over the country could go to school and go to college and become doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. And they did. Not on student loans, but the government paid for it. And I think about Ed Lewis when I talk about the GI Bill because it created a middle class that we really never had. Indiana, since the 20s, had the Ku Klux Klan here, and a lot of wealthy people, but people like Ed Lewis, who on December 7th, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and on December 8th, Ed Lewis signed up for the Navy, and he became a torpedo man in the South Pacific for the entire law. And there was something unusual, I'll tell you about Ed. He had luck. He was one of the luckiest people I've ever seen. And he'd tell me about his luck. We used to travel a lot together, but he said, you know, when I graduated from submarine school, I wanted to be a torpedo man, and you can only have 2 torpedo men in the boat. And we had 3 that got out of school. And he said, I've been lucky all my life, so I got the other 2 guys together, and I said, let's do an odd and even. And the guy who loses doesn't go on the boat. And we did an odd and even, and I lost. And he said, I never lose, but he lost. He told me the boat went out of San Diego and was never heard of again. Amazing life, but that was typical of Ed Lewis. Ed graduated, he went to Butler and graduated from law school in 1955. Set up a small office in downtown Indianapolis in the Circle Center building and put together a small firm. Was constantly in headlines with the Indianapolis Star and the News because he was a crazy Democrat and was constantly fighting, and ultimately moved down on the south side, 5101 Madison Avenue, where he started a small firm that became Lewis, Bowman, Sinclair, Bennett, and later on I'll tell you about it became Lewis, Bowman, Sinclair, and Wagner. In 1977, Robert Wagner graduated from law school, and in 1977, later started practicing law on the side because I was still working for the Aetna Casualty and Surety Company as an adjuster. I'd been there, grew up in Connecticut on the ocean, and worked for the Aetna for 12 years. They transferred me from Hartford, Connecticut to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I thought there were Indians out there. Didn't know a goddamn thing about Tulsa, but my wife and I and a son moved out there. And I was going to become a CPCU in insurance, but they didn't have a course out there. So they had a night law school, and I went out there for 3 years. And they had to move me, of all places, to Indianapolis, Indiana. And they had a law school. Back then, Tom, it was a theater, wasn't it?
It was
Indeed
a theater in many ways.
We used to bring beer to class.
Oh, here.
And smoke cigarettes. But that's where it was, in a theater. And the dean told me that I could get in their law school because I had very high marks at Tulsa. And when I got into law school, which prompted my entire family to come up to Indianapolis, they told me I lost a whole year because I had classes they didn't have, like oil and gas, just a lot of things. So it was, I didn't need a half a year or a semester, I needed a year and a half to graduate. I finished another year, and by God, I only had one semester to go. And I was transferred to South Bend for four years of my life. And it looked like I wasn't going to be an attorney. But a man by the name of James V. Donadio with the firm of Ice, Miller, Donadio, and Ryan was a friend of mine, and he grew up in Connecticut too, and somehow he got me moved back to Indianapolis. And then they weren't going to let me into law school because I said I've been away for 4 years. But I got into law school with the promise that I would never take the bar, because they like to have their students graduate, and they were afraid 4 years I couldn't do it. And I came in and finished my law, and I was sitting there one day when the bar was being given, and I thought, they can't stop me from taking the bar. So I took the bar and passed it. And that was when my life changed in 1977 and 78. And I want you all to know, because I brought this with me. Tom has seen this, but you guys haven't seen it. This is what Indiana was like. This is called our Blue Book. And all the rules that we ever had were written in this little book. It told you how much you could charge for a will, a drunken driving case. It's all right here, and it's all we had. The world was different then. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have email. We had what was called change of venue. And when we had a lawsuit, if a minority was a plaintiff, lawyers took a change of venue to another county, hoping that minority groups would not do well being moved to another county. And sometimes we moved it to 2 or 3 counties. We didn't take many depositions or anything like that. This is what we had as lawyers. Yellow pads. To take statements, take to court. You know what we did back then too? We talked to one another on the phone, or looked them in the eye, because you could get truth doing that. That's the way we lived. And at lunchtime, most of us went to the Indiana Bar restaurant, which was on the corner of Pennsylvania and Market. And there was nothing but lawyers there. And we do it every day, and we talk to people we had cases with and get to know them. And by God, you got to learn about a lot of people that way. It's an interesting book. We had it for years. Had municipal courts in Indianapolis that had jurisdiction of $15,000. If your case was worth more than $15,000, you didn't go to municipal court. You went to Superior Court, and then you went to Circuit Court. We had one Circuit Court and one Probate Court. That's the way things were in 1977 and 78. Very quickly, strange thing happened between 78 and 80. In 78 was a terrible time. There was a war going on in Vietnam. People were dying of Agent Orange. people were being drafted, people were dying. Martin Luther King was killed in 1968. Bobby Kennedy was killed in 1968. Things were in turmoil. I went to a war rally because I was against the war. I'd been drafted before, spent time in the reserves. And as our U.S. Senator was walking out the door, I gave him my card and said, if it can help you a little bit, I'll do it. And I got a call, and he asked for help. And I ended up not only coordinating counties, we had 11 districts. It seems every month I got more and more involved with Senator Vance Harkey. And at one point, he asked me to manage his campaign. He was 22 points behind. I didn't know shit about managing a campaign, but I did it. That's when I first heard of Ed Lewis. Ed Lewis had been there and got Vance Harkey involved in politics about 12 years before, and he was the man in control. And one day Vance Harkey showed me a letter from Ed Lewis, and he said, "Dear Vance, you've gone crazy. You're against the war. You're against being searched. And now you've done the dumbest goddamn thing you've ever done, and that's hired a claim representative to run your campaign." Never met Vance, never met Ed, and I continued, and I shall always remember that one night at the Hillborough Theater, I had an organization out in the streets with 30,000 union people who were going to vote for Vance Harkey. And I was in a little booth, and the curtain opened, and I looked around, and there was a guy standing there that reminded me of Robinson, the movie actor. He had black eyes. I said, "You can't be here. Who are you?" And he said, "Vance Harkey." Ed Lewis. And I said, "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you." And he said, "How the hell did you get all these people?" I said, "It's called organization." And he said, "I want to see you in my office in the morning." And we became friends. And he asked me, I won the campaign for Harkey by 2 votes a precinct. And I was rather popular in the Democratic Party at that time. Ed Lewis, after the campaign, asked me to come down and work for him. And I told him no, I wanted to open my own office. And I did so with 2 other people that I knew from law school. And I advised them that I also wanted to hire another person. It was a minority individual by the name of Pat Chavis. It was the first integrated law firm in the state of Indiana. We called it Lewis, Bowman, Sinclair, and Wagner. And I went over to the Walker building where Pat had his office and begged him to come over and work with us. And for 2.5 or 3 years, we worked together, and Pat got cancer, and I was looking for another place, and Ed Lewis called me at the time and said, "I never offered a job to anyone twice." And I said, "Okay." But for the 2 or 3 years I worked with Pappy Chavis, they called him, we had a wonderful time, learned an awfully lot that affected me in practicing law for the rest of my life. When I started working in Ed Lewis's firm, by the way, I have a section on Ed Lewis, and I wish that you would look through it, for there are some pretty interesting things in there, fun things. There's a statement about our firm in the front of it, and then there's a form in the beginning, and it tells about Ed, 1941. When he got back from the Navy, he ran for House of Representatives in Southern Indiana and lost. I think it had an impact on him. And the next thing I put in the Ed Lewis folder is tongue-in-cheek, but it reflects on how he and I treated one another. We had a lot of fun. I was early on practicing him. I think we started our practice together in '72. And one of the things I wanted to do was to have Christmas party, because I said we could invite clients and politicians. And my suggestion is responded to by Ed in November of '83. Bah. I next put a memo in on sharing rent, sharing kitchen rent, and I thought his response was wonderful. The third is a memo of 1985 on remodeling. It's Ed Lewis. And the fourth is only Ed Lewis could write. And the last, December 1990, 26, is wonderful. If you turn to the back or the attachment on that, you'll notice that the catering was done by Macduff Catering. That's Rick Risingmore. He and I have been friends for 40 years, and he's still a client of ours. He has 2 restaurants. The last memo you'll have to read. It's only Ed Lewis could write it. It's a memo. Ed built a beautiful home in Brown County on a lake. There wasn't a lake when he built a home, but he built a dam down there and had no authority to build it. And the feds or the state got after him, and this is the letter he wrote, and it's wonderful. The last is a picture of Ed and I. When I joined Ed on the south side, we had a very unusual office. I looked at it as an office of last resort. We did an awfully lot of political work. There were only about 6 lawyers there. I think the beginning of the practice was, for me at least, the salary was $16,000 a year. If you take this out, this represents little Bobby Wagner right after he started practicing law, and it went up. It involved a rate increase for Bell Telephone, and the union hired me because the kid that had it to represent them and fight. In the 1980s, hired John Trimble. Had a significant effect on the firm. John worked for me as a clerk, and when he graduated from law school here, they gave 8 awards and John got 7 of them. And I thought I had a pretty good pick in John to work as a clerk. But when he graduated, I thought he would go to a big firm like Baker and Daniels, Barnes Thornburg. And one day he came in and said, aren't you going to hire me? And I said, well, I thought you'd go to one of the bigger firms. And he said, no, I want to work here. And I said, okay, you're hired. And he left, and a week later he came back and said, how much are you going to pay me? And I said, how much do you want? And he told me, and he was hired. And we started developing insurance work then, and sort of drifted out of a lot of the union work and did more and more defense work. It was that, during that period of time, a lot of the things that I had wanted to do were materialized. I wanted to hire women attorneys. In my graduating class at law school, there was only one woman attorney. One black. I wanted to hire more minorities. I wanted to try cases. Gotta have fire in your belly to practice law. John was a significant help in permitting that want, if you will, to materialize. We hired more lawyers, and the business increased. I was able to bring in 5 insurance companies. That was unheard of at the time. But you know how you do it? You ask for business. You carry business cards in your pocket and go to bars, restaurants. You have your home phone on the card. I made over $1 million from people who called me at my house on the weekends and had a problem. And you know, you keep on asking, and every now and then, people say yes. Ed and I also did things early on, even after we broke up the partnership. But Ed was very unusual in people he contacted. And he represented REMCs. There was a group in Louisiana that was trying to build a power plant in Indiana. We had helped build one, or Louisiana, we had helped build one in Indiana. People in Washington told the people in Louisiana that they ought to come up to Indianapolis and talk to the lawyers up here that helped build the power plant. So up they came, and we made friends with the people in Louisiana. And it became a very warm relationship. And we did a lot of business in Louisiana, helping those people out, and no other than Robert F. Wagner started going to Louisiana every 2 or 3 weeks. Got to know the governor of Louisiana very well, Edmund Edwards, ladies' man, quite a guy. He ended up in jail. A lot of politicians in Louisiana go to jail, but he was a good friend. I used to go, I just kept the relationship going, very warm, and one of the principals in Louisiana said, Robert, we want to come up and thank you for all the work you've done, and Mr. Lewis. And we agreed to a party at my house in my backyard. This was what the women folks in Louisiana hand painted. And they sent hundreds of these out. And the first year they brought trucks up from Indiana, and they had shrimp and crawfish and everything else. They hung moss from my trees in my backyard. And the nice folks were there. The party was wonderful. And it became so good they did it another year. And you know, we got clients because they were very unusual. And they did it for a third year when we had 250 people show up in my backyard and decided we couldn't do it anymore. But they painted these invitations every year, the women, and sent them out. So what did we do the fourth year? Mr. Lewis and I got together, and we had a pal by the name of John Williver, happens to be Donnie's dad. He was a client and a friend, and we switched the party from the Wagner house to the Williver house. She was a little baby then. Within 2 years, we had 2,000 people, the party, showing up, which was unheard of. But if you weren't invited, you were no one. That continued, I might add, for quite a few years, when Don's dad was killed in a plane accident. We stopped it. But doing that was something that I believed was good for the community and good for the law firm and got business. It also resulted in involvement for people. My God, if you have 2,000 people at a party that Louis Wagner threw, you have to look the guests in the eye and talk to them. That's how we got business. When all this was going on, parties, the Wagners, the Wolvers, going to Louisiana, running campaigns, and dealing with Crazy Bill. We broadened our business, and we hired more attorneys. And I became more convinced that the parties were the thing to do. Not that I like getting drunk at parties, I did. But it was an opportunity to meet people and bring in new parties. You're all familiar with the Christmas parties. When we moved up to our new office, I had them every year, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And 2 years ago, it got so big we couldn't have it there anymore, so we went down to Crane Bay. And this last year, I think we had 500 people. Judges, Supreme Court judges, regular judges, came to a law firm called Louis Wagner. And you had the opportunity to shake hands, to tell dirty stories, and have fun. You also took the office on trips every summer. A lot of times, Donnie, we went down to Louisville, to the races, we went to wine places, but it was an opportunity to get you guys together in an atmosphere that wasn't structured. And we did that for quite a few years. I don't know if you did it this last year, go anyplace, but it's something that's important. And of course, I had parties in that backyard where the Southerners used to go for 25 years for law clerks. And every summer we had the law clerks show up at my house, and they had to do a skit. Doc did a wonderful one year, but they were wonderful. And what was it? It was an opportunity gained for people to meet and hug people, to touch people, all in our firm. I don't think we talk to people enough, touch people enough. We get too busy. That's why I try to go by every office every day and say good morning. It's a good thing to do. It doesn't hurt. You don't go to hell for doing it. One of the most interesting things that took place in the development, and by the way, I showed put a lot of things in folders. I saw it fall. I'll get it. This is a picture of a guy by the name of Peter Brunsky, great plaintiff's attorney. When I was hustling business and had the integrated law firm, I went to all of the attorneys in town who I settled cases with at the end and said, give me all your shit and I'll handle it. And one of the cases I got, everyone turned down, was a case where some women were killed on an interstate. And I took the firm, filed the case, And we went up to Boone County, where Pete acted as my local attorney. First jury trial I've ever had. And we tried the case together. And the last day of the trial, I found a witness who came in and saw the whole thing, and we settled the case for $42,000, which was an awfully lot of money back then. And Pete and I went to Indianapolis, to Boone County, and got drunk. We've stayed friends this entire period of time. One of the best cases I ever tried was Perry County lawsuit where 2 little kids were hurt, and Pete tried the case against me. 2 kids hurt. Both sides had statements on yellow paper, some of them for the same person. And when Pete put on his evidence the first day, I had a statement from every one of his witnesses. And after he finished his examination of the first witness, I cross-examined. And I had a statement from him. But some of it was bad. So I started crossing from the statement, and Pete walked over to my table and grabbed it out of my hand and said, "I think the jury would like to see what you're looking at." And there was some bad stuff in it. He did that 4 times that day. And I went back to the room, staying overnight there, and I thought, what the hell am I going to do with this? I had like 6 or 7 more statements just like that from witnesses he was going to call. At 4 a.m., I underlined everything that was good in all of those statements in black. Everything that was bad, I put in red, and it said, "This is an effing lie." The following morning, we tried. He did what he did before. He grabbed a statement right out of my hand and said, "Jury would like to know what's in." Jury would. You son of a bitch. We tried the case, and while the jury was out, they thought the jury would be out for an hour or so, but they weren't, and one of the defendants said, Mr. Obrensky, one of the plaintiff's little kids said, "Mr. Obrensky, jury's out. I'd like to settle my case." So I called the insurance company. They said the only thing we'll pay is what we offered before the trial. The kid said, "I'll take it." So one case was settled. The jury was out 14 hours and came back with a verdict for the defendant, Robert Wagner's case. I saw one of the kids that didn't settle the case. And then I talked to the other kid that settled his case. And the kid that settled his case was crying. And he said, "Oh, I feel awful, Mr. Wagner. My buddy was hurt worse than I was, and he didn't get any money." And I said, "Well, you can solve that problem. You give him half of the money you just got in settlement." and he ran away. I want to talk about some crazy things. In addition to running campaigns, building a practice, I did a crazy thing. And all of this helped the law firm, but I knew most of the reporters for the Star and what have you, and one day a guy who was a reporter said, "Mr. Wagner, you're in trouble all the time. They're going to pass a metric law in Washington, and there are a lot of people that don't like it." I started, very stupidly, a metric rebellion. And these are people that joined it. Richard Lugar, Senator, Birch Bayh, Dave Evans. That was in the Star. And I used to have a hell of a lot of fun with it because it caught on, and in my office at 11 o'clock at night, I'd call Oregon or Montana, just different people all over, or get calls from them. And people would send me 50 cents, $1, 25 cents, and tea bags. I went to Washington to fight this. In the meantime, Canada caught on and they did the same thing. And in Washington, I went to the NRA, National Riflemen's Association, most of the right-wing group in the United States, and I hated the son of the bitches, but I demanded to talk to the president, and they finally showed me in. I had all this literature. I said to the president, "I'd like you to give me $25,000 to support this." And he said, "I'm not going to do that. I can't pay that type of money." And I said, "Because you're a goddamn communist." And he said, "I've been called everything in the world, but not a communist." I said, "Well, that's what you are. They do secret things." And he said, "Well, why are you saying that?" I said, "Well, I looked at all the guns you have down in your museum, and I know something about guns. And most of them are millimeters, metric. But you don't have a goddamn Hawkins rifle down there." He said, "I don't." I said, "That's because you're a communist." I left Washington without a penny, but we defeated the metric, though. Thanks to Robert Wagner getting involved with a bunch of crazies. These were just fun things you do in life that are exciting. I left a print of planting trees on West Street. We had moved up to where we are now, and I wanted to start a program for the inner city kids. And I worked as a nurseryman when I was a youngster, and I thought if I could get some of the nurseries around town to put in trees and hire kids in the summer, it would benefit them in money and what have you, learn a trade. But one day I drove to work and noticed there were no trees on West Street. So I decided I was going to plant trees on West Street. And I got the Power and Light Company to give me some money. Dina Cox and I wrote the federal government and got $280,000, raised $1,200,000, and we planted trees from I-65 all the way down West Street to I-70, and they're still there. got a lot of publicity from it. And you know what else? Got more clients. But I'm very proud of that. And if you go down on the first floor, where we have a conference room, you'll notice some maps and things there, and some articles about West Street tree planting. When we started planting trees, I think you were there, weren't you?
I think it was before me.
Well, we had big balls of trees, and I had most of the firm out there, and had quite a day. But we got them planted in 2 or 3 days, and most of them are still there, and I have an agreement when they get knocked down, they'll replace them, but it takes a lot of time. Another story about our firm. You have a copy of this newspaper article. I don't know if you read it or not. Mr. Lewis had a big easy chair. Got it recovered one day. The guy that did it called me and said, "Miss Wagner, you gotta look at this chair. It had a bug in it." It was a transmitter that worked for about a year and sent messages about a mile. We brought in the FBI, we brought in everyone. And no one could tell us how the bug got in the chair or who put the bug there. Ed Lewis's office was also burglarized, and all his canceled checks were taken. Never knew who took all those checks. Towards the end of the 2-year statute of limitations, a reporter who was a woman came in my office and wanted to talk and with Ed Lewis, and he wouldn't talk to press people, he never did. But took him in his office and I said, "Ed, this is so-and-so, she needs to talk to you." And she looked at Ed and she said, "Mr. Lewis, do you know there's a bug in your chair?" And we wanted to know how she knew there was a bug in her chair, and she said, "Because they bugged me too." And that gave us enough to finally figure out some of the people that bugged us. And we ended up filing lawsuit, Bill Julian, Tolson, and I, for Ed Lewis, against a private investigator, the public service company that hated REMCs, Baker and Daniels, and a couple more. They were all involved in the bugging. And we settled that case. We used to have a party, John Eckert, out at Broadway. There was a Rex Early also threw it at a pond. And hundreds of people would go to that party all the time. And we had an agreement. You could talk to any reporter. Any politician, and nothing would be said. When we settled this case, the day before it was finalized, I went to that party and drank too much. the following day when I went into the office and Lewis was waiting for me, he said, "How does it feel to piss away a $250,000 settlement?" Because in the headlines of the Indianapolis Star was our settlement. I said, "I feel awful about it. Did it happen?" He said, "They called me and they told me they had 17 affidavits from people who you talked to." I said, "That's a damn lie." He said, "Well, thank God for that." I said, "I think I told 60 people." At the end of the day, or after being abused all day long, I went into Ed's office and I said, "They're going to settle this case today because they have to answer interrogatories at 4 o'clock. He said, "No, they're not going to settle it." At 3:45, they called and they said, "If Wagner will promise never to do it again, we'll go forward with the settlement." So that's what happened. I want to tell you about going up to where we are now. We ran out of space down on the south side. I didn't want to go to a bank building where all other lawyers went. I wanted a small place that reflected some of my views on life, too. And one day I was driving around looking for property and I drove down Indiana Avenue. And there was a vacant place where our building is right now, and it was full of beer bottles, cigarette butts, and what have you. And our guy was standing there with a sextant. And I walked over and I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" He said, "We're going to build a building here." And I looked around and I held out my hand and I said, "I'm Robert Wagner. That's true, we are." And I chose that spot because it represented a lot in life. As many of you know, Indiana Avenue was the hot spot for blacks. The musicians who traveled from Louisiana to Chicago always stopped on Indiana Avenue. It represented, in my mind, potential growth in the future. And that's turned out right, because they have continued to grow. The universities continue to grow, and we're in a beautiful location. It's also encouraged people to talk about our firm, where we are, what we do. And I think to a great degree, it's affected how we look at one another and feel about one another and feel about our future. When we went into the building, we didn't have enough people to fill the top floor. It was only half filled. I went out and hustled Bob Hammerly, who the criminal attorney, to come in, but we only took half of the floor. But within a few years, we had the entire the top floor. We continued to grow. Good people. Some left, some stayed. But we developed a culture, continued to develop a culture, I'll say. And we took over a little of the bottom floor, where the canal is, where you can see kids running. And ultimately, we took over the whole bottom floor, which we operate today. And then after a while, we took over the first floor, half of it. The eye clinic is in the other half, but I know they have to leave. For a short period of time, some of you remember, we had staff down the canal. I think there were 6 people down there because we were out of space. But we're able to get everyone in now. We've had some significant changes in the law firm, how we operate. It seems to me we're doing less insurance work and more corporate work. I thank Rich Blakelock for that change, and it's going very, very well. I have no reason to believe that it will do anything but continue to grow. It will grow because there are people there like the people here. And you all do a very, very good job. And we keep on doing what we're doing now. We won't be an Ice Miller. We won't be a Baker and Daniels. We won't be a Barnes Thornton. We'll be a great law firm that when you get on the elevator and someone's on the elevator with you, you can hug them or shake their hand and know what their name is. And that's important. It's important for us to be the size we are because we teach one another. We talk to one another. And when we learn things, we tell one another. And all these different things that we do that other firms don't do. The caring that we've cultivated from the 1970s, nonstop, through today, will continue. And it won't change because it's too strong to change it. You can't change things like that. So, I wish you all the very best. Hope you'll all stay there, and hope you all will enjoy the culture. Thank you. If you got any questions, you can ask them. You're not going to get fired. Did you all read Ed Lewis's letter? Wasn't it wonderful?
Well,
They don't want you to.
I tried to use it when I'm a good lawyer and she could talk about doing cell phone.
That I continue to do. I've tried hundreds of jury trials. In every trial I've ever tried, I've sent a letter to the other attorney on the other side. And you know something? Compliment him. Pays dividends. There's a letter in here that I received from Richard's Medical, and where's my briefcase? Oh. Richard's Medical is a huge medical company. And they had a hip called the Bechtel hip. Here's one of them. They were made out of cast stainless steel. They all broke. And Aetna insured them for a little while, and they had a case in Indianapolis, and they were losing cases all over the United States, and I had the case. And we tried the case. The man, the plaintiff, was Mr. Josephson. He was from England and testified beautifully. And Bill Conower was the plaintiff's attorney. He's now in jail for stealing. But it was a lengthy trial, and their chief, the head of their products, left a trial in St. Louis and came over and watched the end of this trial. And the jury went out. Bill Conower said, I hope when you reach your verdict, you'll do what they do in England. Join us all and we'll have a spot of tea together. The jury was out 26 minutes and I won the case. The man from Richards was there. All he'd seen was losing cases all over the United States. And within a month, he called me and he said, would you do more of these cases? I said, hell yes. So while all the other shit was going on for 15 years, I tried all of their cases east of the Rocky Mountains. And some days, they gave me cases that I were out there for years, where I tried the case 2 days notice, but I knew every goddamn thing about these. And that went on for 15 years. And it was a lot of fun, and it brought, again, another wave of business because I went to all these seminars and things and had more clients call that did this type of work or all type of medical work. Dina Cox has gotten great because she's inherited it all, and she's done a wonderful job. But this is how we developed all of our trials, or all of the medical work we do. These silly things, they were invented during World War II. The Germans did it to get their soldiers back in the front lines quickly. And we made them out of stainless steel. Not of stainless steel, but cast steel, and they broke. But probably made, well, I know, probably millions of dollars over 15 years trying these silly cases. You know what? They were fun. I always remember going down to Arkansas and having to take over a case. A big firm the size of Barnes Thornburg had it. And the guy said, Mr. Wagner is going to come down and try the case. And when I went down there, they called the president of Richards and they said, have you met Mr. Wagner? And he said, yeah. He said, he show up here. He got cowboy boots on, a cowboy hat on, a leather coat, and a beard. And he said, a what? He said, he has hair on his face, and that's not permitted in our bar in Little Rock. So he flew out. 2 days before the trial, I tried the case. 12-man jury. 7 men had beards. And I won the case. A lot of fun. Isn't it a lot of fun, though? And you know, the great tragedy of law right now is we are a middle class. And there are a lot of rich people that can do whatever they wish. You can develop bone spurs so you don't have to go to Vietnam. You can pay for your education. But most of us could never do that. And it costs to go to law school and undergrad, $150,000 today. And people do that because they want to be lawyers. Because that's sacred. Being a lawyer is sacred. My friend Vern Petrie, who most of you know, he wants them called doctors of law. And he's very, very active in doing that. He said in Europe they call them doctors of law, and damn it all, we get an LLB, and that is a doctors of law. So he's got a business card, Vern Petrie, doctor of law now. And I kid him about it all the time. But it's something pretty special, isn't it, Michael? Not that many people have it. It costs a lot to get it. And damn it all, we have to cherish it and do what's right, don't we? And I've always said the most significant, important thing in practicing law, don't ever tell a lie. Don't ever tell a lie. Because if you tell one, you tell two. And that's the destruction of our system. But we'll never do that. The others might, but not us, huh? Thank you.